Hey folks, thanks for joining our Monday Mindshare again, and welcome to, what are we in now, February, and the things are starting to warm up here in the North Hemisphere at last, a little bit, not totally. We've been 3 years into the Monday Mindshares now. Originally, of course, we were writing them up as a blog, and in the last year and a half, they've been, video YouTube, if you will, reaching out to the community, talking through, if you will, both education, research, and training techniques, bringing on some of the athletes. And increasingly, SFuels is beginning to span beyond just the performance athlete, but also the active lifestyler from a low carb perspective. And we want to make sure that we are talking authentically and with the best we can in terms of credibility of our leaders in those respective communities, both performance athletes and also into our lifestylers around the world. So to that end, Michelle Hearn is now leading our Active Lifestylers channel on YouTube, and we'll continue to weekly launch videos with Michelle to educate some of the work going down, whether it is, again, nutrition or active lifestyle, Pilates, yoga, and what have you. And she'll be leading that. She'll also be reaching out to talking to the practitioners that are actually treating conditions associated with metabolic conditions. So Michelle will continue to lead that. But today I wanted to announce a pretty exciting collaboration we're having. And we wanted to bring a specialist to lead our Monday Mindshare community going forward for the performance athletes. And I'm really jazzed to announce that we're bringing on both a leader in sports medicine and exercise physiology, and we'll talk through his background and training and that. He's more than a dozen Ironman and 70.3s under his belt, so he's experienced the pain like all of us. And endure.iq, he's the U.S. representative coach for endure.iq in the Blues stable. And he's joining us now at SFuels as the lead of our Monday Mindshare. Please welcome Aaron Geiser. How you doing, buddy?
Leighton, thanks for having me. And it's a privilege to have this opportunity to really educate the population a little bit further and really help individuals live that low carb, healthy, fat lifestyle.
Sounds good. Well, this background behind me here, it's obviously it's virtual, but it's the finish of the UTMB race in Chamonix, France, and as much as it's not so much finish for me, but in partnership with you and your leadership, we're looking forward for you to take the mantelpiece and take the Monday Mindshare community forward with all of your expertise in coaching. And Aaron also runs, folks, the endure.iq SFuels training sessions through the US time zones on Zwift. And you can join him there, Saturdays and Wednesdays, Aaron, I think US time?
Wednesdays, US time currently is 1:30. I think we hit kind of that 7:30 time zone in New Zealand on Wednesday, or Thursday in New Zealand, Wednesday in the States.
Yeah.
And then Saturday morning in the States at 8 a.m. in the Eastern Standard Time. So if you go across to the West Coast, we have a couple of people waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get on.
I know some of your sessions are now like 5 hours long. So even if they wake up an hour later, it's okay, Hey, so yeah, it's awesome having you on board. We've enjoyed starting to work with you, and folks, we got a ton of stuff to talk through. Really exciting what we're working with Aaron on. But why don't we just start with just a bit of your background, and maybe just start with firstly where you did your schooling on sports medicine and kind of what you were focused on there.
So I went to a small school in Tennessee called Lincoln Memorial, and that's where sports medicine with a focus in athletic training. I had my studies focus was injury prevention and recovery. Then added on top of that, the exercise physiologist certification. And in that time, it just kind of naturally led me to endurance sports. I always had these conversations with individuals that their bodies were breaking down, whether it be from the training that they were doing, whether it be volume, intensity. And it just had me get much, much more interested in the field and taking that background of injury prevention and recovery, along with how the physiology of the body adapts to certain training protocols. It just kind of came together really, really smoothly. And it's been a perfect pairing for me. And especially motivating individuals doesn't seem to be a problem for me. So it kind of all of them come together.
Yeah, for sure. And, some of the feedback through the chat during the Zwift sessions, your athletes around the country, it's very obvious you're having a really positive influence on them all. And some of them say they even like you, after the training sessions they sit with you on. So that's awesome.
Well, especially when you get somebody on a trainer for 5.5 hours and they still say that they like you, you gotta know you're doing something right.
Thing, right. Exactly. Well, hey, I guess maybe a little bit more on that. Your coaching, you run your own coaching with, I thought last time we talked, you were talking like 50, 60 athletes, maybe it's more than that now. And then you're doing this work with Plus in the endure.iq stable. Maybe just give us an update on kind of where all that's heading.
It's a little bit lower on this. I figured that I wanted to give a little bit more personal attention to those individuals. And I think when I got, when you get a load that large, it makes it very challenging to really give the athletes your time.
Yeah.
So by backing down just a little bit, it's been able to give me a little bit more one-on-one personal time with my own athletes. And really that going globally has really been a fun process because it gets me to see things in a completely different line. The biggest challenge right now when I look out the window and see snow on the ground, and then I talk to one of my athletes in another area where they're having 85 degrees in Fahrenheit standpoint and probably 32 Celsius. I'm a warm weather guy, so that kind of sounds really, really interesting to me.
Yeah.
But it's been a whole lot of fun. And then the opportunity to really help Dan build the endure.iq squad has been really a project of a lifetime. It's really taken an opportunity and building something from the ground up has been a very, very interesting process, and especially working with one of the great minds in not just coaching, but in exercise physiology and sports scientists. It's been a privilege and it's been a whole lot of fun. So help work on that has been really, it's been kind of in the 2 years or a year and a half that I've been exposed to him. It's almost been like it feels like a decade of knowledge that you gain.
Yeah, no, he's a great partner and certainly a close partner of SFuels. And we were just with him and Hayden through the week on just looking at optimizing for 2022 and just some of the insights. It's not like he's still reflecting back on the textbook work he did back in college. Like he's looking at last week's research, papers. Mm-hmm. So he's really at the cutting edge, and whether it's on himself in ice baths or with his athletes, and it's a privilege to work with him, and we enjoy the partnership. I wanted to just ask you the obvious question. When you went through your studies, firstly, just generally, how big was nutrition a factor in the study of, if you will, recovery, et cetera? And we're going to get to your experience in terms of journey into low carb. But how long ago was that when you studied, and what was the nature of nutrition as it related to that study then?
Man, you're really asking me to show my age at that point.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So back at that time, it was 20 years now. And really one of those things was nutrition was still not a focus at that point. And especially with my baseball background, I always found kind of from that sixth inning on, I always had a depletion of energy. And that, after I got out of school, kind of fueled my interest of trying to figure out kind of what the reason behind that was. And really, I wish I would have gotten more quality information at the time I was graduating, but most of my information that I've been able to build up has come from research that's really been done the last 5 to 10 years,
Yeah.
especially everything that's coming out lately. You're finding so much more, and we're just on a different level at this point. And I think taking in that information has been vital to not just recovery, training, performance, all these things. And we're just finding out that some of the things that were taught to us probably when we were children were probably not the most efficient or built on science at that time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just listening to some podcasts this week, and just increasingly what was, highly expensive lab testing in a lot of sports science has increasingly become democratized, where consumers can get actually fairly accurate access to self-testing and self-hacking, if you will, of understanding their own markers, whether that's blood markers or heart rate variability markers and what have you. And all of these things, I think, are just feeding into the cloud, if you will, a far greater wave of information to kind of cut through what's fad and possible versus aggregate data to show trends. And I think on the surface, we were all trained obviously in high carb training and racing and what have you, and on the surface it felt right and logical. But again, I think it was as the more and more data was tested with athletes, it just didn't add up. And for us, frankly, in creating SFuels, it was exactly that, where A, it wasn't working for us in racing and training, and B, when you started looking at the data coming off the body, it just was a disconnect to the textbook. So I guess we'll see more of that as increasing on-body sensors tell us more about what's going on everyday life and training and racing.
I can hope so, just because you still have some conversations with old conventional individuals, and sometimes you have to really utilize the science that's coming out. And then especially some of the athletes that we get the chance to work with, utilizing some of their success stories for individuals to buy in that have just been fed that information for 30 plus years. They just think, well, I can't go on an hour and 20-minute ride with no carbohydrates and such like that. And it's just well, give it a try and let's see how it goes.
And it's interesting because I think, firstly, a lot of triathletes evolve out of sprint distance as they're younger and they grow into 73. And obviously, Ironman and the same in running, 10K to marathon to ultras. And, what worked in 2-hour racing, they quickly realize, is problematic in the longer, slower, intensity work. And what's interesting is when some of these athletes who have been, in some cases, professional athletes, podium on the world stage, their numbers as associated with fat oxidation are really quite poor. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean they can't churn out, world-class 2-hour racing. But of course, that's a different story. But that all said, what's exciting and what I think has just continued to trigger our ongoing passion at SFuels is that you start altering both the training and the diet a little, and those numbers can just invert themselves in terms of their efficiency. So your story on coming into low carb, when did that all start for you? I should say, I say right carb, meaning live low and race higher, if you will. But what's your story?
I made the transition roughly about 4 years ago and came out. I kind of in the time that I left school, finished my baseball career before the time I actually picked up triathlon. I was doing a lot of weightlifting and was fairly low carb at that time and had great results from the standpoint of recovery, just building overall muscle and really not having breakdowns in the body. And then kind of like you talked about, the way that we had been educated when I came into triathlon, I started to increase my carbohydrates, and kind of some of the things that you pointed out, it just didn't make sense for me. It just, the body was not responding. I had more inflammation. I had more breakdowns from a skeletal muscle situation. Right. And when you have those skeletal muscle issues, you can't train, or you have to train something else that might not be beneficial for the 3 sports per se. So gathering all that information and then making that choice to go with the low carbohydrate, doing kind of that cold keto for the 3 weeks, and then coming out, finding that sweet spot process, I would start to go on 3, 4, 5 hour rides. And what I used to carry on some of those rides or even runs was weighing me down. And next thing you know, I'm coming out in this particular lifestyle, and I have 3 bottles on my bike that really just have electrolytes and water on it, and I don't need anything. And it's just something's about this. And then as we find out with the research, especially the more time we put into that low carb, healthy fat lifestyle, the more efficient our body produces, and that fat max really starts to increase. And probably over the last 2 years is where I've seen the largest gains in that particular aspect, is that my output, no matter how little a carbohydrate I have before, my output for that particular session I have the energy to go for that particular process. And of course, there is a limit to how long you can go at that higher level of race training or whatever it might be. But it's just, I found it to be super, super impressive with just what you need really on the bike to sustain that same energy level and effort level throughout the course, especially through these 5-hour rides that we're doing right now on the Zwift endure.iq squad training sessions. It's just, I start taking SFuels train about 30 minutes into it. When I have those rides go a little bit over 4.5 hours, I start to introduce a little bit of race plus, probably around the 3-hour range.
Yeah.
By the time that I'm getting off and doing my run off the bike, I feel like $1 million in that case. Great. So it's something speaks for itself in that aspect.
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there, but it's very similar journey for us in starting SFuels. And we were in Hong Kong at the time and just using off the shelf, maltodextrin based products in ultra running, and just hands and feet swelling, and the humidity is big over there, obviously. But I was taking ibuprofen after long weekend runs, and it got to a point where I just had to relook at the research. And for us, it was a 3-week shift in diet, and we didn't do a dramatic shift at the time, a few of us. And within 3 weeks, we started seeing, not needing ibuprofen, and that's where it started. And actually, we didn't develop products on the basis initially for performance, but more that we could train consistently. And it was actually increasingly, I'm thinking that the science of enabling consistent high volume training, that's where the performance comes out of low carb living, versus you're taking a special type of diet, and that diet, the next day gives you performance. It's just not like that at all. You covered a lot of ground there, but it's very similar, I think, journeys. I know you've been, obviously, as you get closer, and we'll talk about your race season coming up yourself, but I know you've been obviously increasing your high intensity work also. Your experience, obviously, I just not after here to talk up our primed product, but the role of caffeine, not just in cognitive function and not just increasing fat oxidation, but also in, it has both in research and, in our own findings, there's just a lot of material value on our perception of pain in training. Do you want to comment on that?
Especially through some of these higher intensity bouts that I'm putting through at this point, there's days, especially I am a little unconventional when I pick up that what is Wednesday in the States ride and Thursday ride in New Zealand. It's because I'm leading a Southern Hemisphere ride, and they've been in their their race season for a couple of months now. And what I've found is, especially coming out of our North American season, October for me, leading right into that, it was very, very beneficial because I had spent such a great deal of time in that kind of specific / competitive phase from 2021 that I was really taken aback. I was backing off my training while still leading that really race style ride.
Right.
And implementing the primed product was huge from the standpoint of I was not necessarily primed for race efforts at that point anymore, but being able to tolerate that little bit higher RPE in that sense really allowed me to get through those sessions feeling really strong. And especially with the added electrolytes in there as well, it just kind of allowed me to kind of roll the day over and start the recovery process right after I finished that workout as well. So not only did I make it through that workout with that little bit lower rate of perceived exertion, but I had already started kind of that refueling process for the following workout the following day, which was more likely going to be just an endurance and aerobic based workout.
Yeah, we find we're talking to more athletes about that. I mean, there's the classic use of caffeine in coffees and teas and what have you for cognitive improvement. And then you actually need to ramp the amount to 3 milligrams thereabout per kilogram if you're trying to upregulate fat oxidation. But in the middle of those two kind of sits this spot, which is quite unique for everyone, where perceptions of exertion can be altered through caffeine, through dopamine effectively. And so yeah, I just started to see and hear more athletes talk about this, and I think it serves a really interesting role and function for those high intensity sessions, which, you know, for me coming out of ultra back into triathlon, if there's one thing that turned me off the most, it was having to do these jolly high intensity sessions. So I'm liking it anyway.
Well, one thing I would have to also say is that, especially for these Zwift rides, I am for those that aren't familiar, I'm leading a group and pretty much text messaging the entire ride. So in a lot of cases, and you've been on some of those Saturday rides where my brain has to be fairly clear for some of these answers for the questions that I'm getting. Yeah. So I've never actually probably put that together. If it makes me think a little bit clearer to give our community a little bit clearer answers when my brain is firing on all cylinders.
Dan should be paying us a little, because he doesn't have to pay you so much, because you don't feel so bad on doing 2 jobs at once, right? Just because we're giving you the caffeine. But anyway, let's talk about 2022 and your racing. I mean, you've been laying down some serious volume. You know, when you do a 5-hour session on a Saturday, it adds up quickly for the rest of the week then. So are you lining up Texas or some other races coming up soon?
So I Texas full is at the end of April, but 3 weeks, I think it is 3 weeks before that, maybe it's 4 weeks before that, I have Oceanside, April 2nd. So that one is a deferral from the previous year. So it just kind of found its way on the calendar, but it kind of runs into a good spot where I'll just have a race volumed weekend that week out in California and then come back over to the East Coast. But those are the two right now that I have focus on with April. And then my plan is, especially with some of the things that we got with World Championship Ironman coming to St. George in May, kind of focusing on some aspects of that with athletes and with SFuels and endure.iq, and kind of taking that middle part of the year to really focus on my athletes, and then looking to get back into racing, hopefully Kona and maybe another 70.3 to kind of finish the year off in October.
Cool. That's great. Well, yeah. So folks, as Aaron said, we're teeing up some fairly big plans for SFuels presence at the Utah World Champs in St. George, both at the Expo and around the Expo. And we're going to give you more details on that, but it's going to be exciting. And so, yeah, going forward, Aaron will lead our topics and discussions. I'll probably pop in once a month or so, and we'll have a chat on some of the work that we're looking at SFuels and as we go through the season. talking about some of the results and performances around the world of low carb athletes. And it's been awesome, Bud, working with you so far. And we're looking forward to having you be the captain of the ship going forward here at SFuels on the performance athlete side of the house. So welcome.
Well, I appreciate it. And I look forward to keeping this boat floating in the same direction as it has been for the last 3 years, and especially the last year and a half on the YouTube aspect of things.
Sounds great, Bob. Well, yeah, we'll catch up soon. And folks, Aaron's always available through social networking too. If you wanted to reach out directly to him, Aaron, what's your connection there?
So on Instagram, I'm at Try A Geiser, so Ageiser, and then on Facebook, I'm at Aaron Captain.
There you go, folks. Well, yeah, we'll put it in the show notes, but if you ever want to reach out to Aaron, he's able to catch up anytime. Thanks again, Bub. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to moving forward.